So this is chapter 10. It's the media and politics. So we're going to go through a couple of things first before we get started. The first is that we have to define what we're going to call media. Because media is one of those words that people toss out all the time. But for our purposes, we sort of have to come to an agreed definition. And so we're going to use what the book provides for us, which is that it is a means of communication, such as radio, television, or other news outlets that reach or influence people widely. Okay, so that's what we call media. It's a form of communication, TV, radio, news outlets, that reaches or influences a wide audience of people. So when we talk about media, we're not just talking about news organizations. We're not just talking about blogs and social media. We're talking about a lot of things that will reach all of you, and that's a lot of things. The other thing I want you to kind of keep in mind here is that it has to have an audience. If it doesn't have an audience, then it's not considered media. So if I write a paper and 2 people look at it, it's not considered media. It has to reach a wide audience of people. And that's how media kind of survives. We have 2 kind of subgroups of media. We call one of them true media. This is generally public media, things that you would think of, newspapers, television, radio, things like that. And then we have social media. And social media is new. It's relatively new in the world of politics. It's been really used for about the last 10 to 13 years. But the thing you need to understand about social media is that its main purpose is to connect people. It is not to inform people, okay? When you read something on your Facebook feed or on your Twitter feed, or you see a picture on Instagram, it has not been verified, fact-checked, nothing. So one of the problems that we're starting to see in the world of political science is that your generation takes what you see on social media and uses it as news, uses it as information. I can't tell you how many times in the last year I've gotten a sophomore in American government who's like, Ms. Noble, did you read the article that came up on my Facebook feed about that woman who protested in front of the Capitol for 14 days? It's not real. That's sensational stuff that's been put out there for you. Nobody has checked that. And so you have to be really careful. Social media is really used to connect people. It's not used to inform people. It's not its main purpose. So just be careful about that. Okay, this is a couple of examples that your book gives. I'm happy that they do this, about how you can use social media in a really partisan way, which is why, again, social media is so dangerous when we think about how people interpret it. So the top one is Barack Obama used social media a lot during the campaign to try and push the Affordable Care Act when it was going through the legislative branch. And so they would often put up feeds on their Twitter from people, everyday people, sort of about why healthcare reform matters. And so they're using quotes. On the other side of that, though, John Boehner is going to give you some pieces of information that he thinks are important for you to know about in order to repeal what they call Obamacare. By the way, remember that Obamacare is just a simple use of media right there. Is not Obamacare. It is the Affordable Care Act. But someone in a communications office who was super smart decided to put Obama's name on it. Therefore, if you don't like Obama, you probably don't like Obamacare. And so that sort of helped in that media campaign. But one of the things you have to realize is that you cannot support President Obama and you can support the Affordable Care Act. Because they put Obamacare on it, people feel like they can support, one or the other. They have to, either support it all or not. So it just shows you how social media can really pull that partisan tie. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the history of media in the United States because it's got a very long and rich history on how to use media. What it really starts out with is the press, which we call newspapers, essentially. There's about 3,000 newspapers published in 1860, which gives you a really good idea about how much newspapers are relied upon for your daily news. It would be very common for you in the early 1900s to have 2 or 3 newspapers come to your home and for you to spend a good amount of your day reading the paper, reading what's going on in the news. The thing that you have to understand about this mass readership of newspapers is that it's primarily managed news. And what we mean by managed news is that it's news stories that have been kind of approved or generated and distributed by the government. So it's stories that the government wants the media to tell, and the media would typically pick it up and tell it. What we start to see is this emergence after a number of centuries or decades of newspapers kind of evolving and getting more popular, is that we see what a rise in what we call yellow journalism. And yellow journalism is getting away from more of a managed news sense to a sensational news base. Finding the sensational stories, the stories that are juicy and controversial and a little bit more, I don't know, I guess you could say interesting. However, sometimes it's probably not. So what we're really taking a look at is, take a look at some examples. FDR, right? He's a president who is in a wheelchair. He has polio. Most people in the United States at the time didn't know that. Why? Because it was just kind of commonplace that the press just didn't talk about it. It's not important. It doesn't change who he is as a person. They weren't interested in the sensational stories. Nowadays, should FDR be president, that's all they talk about for a good long time. It's why we've got presidential candidates that we talk about if they're actual citizens or not. It's sensational. It's not actually relevant to who they are and what they're doing, but it's sensational. It's things like JFK. JFK, we now know, looking back into his history, had many mistresses in the White House. It wasn't ever covered. The press always turned their eyes because it wasn't something that was appropriate to cover. Nowadays, everything's out for display or criticism. Things like the press now reports on how much money Barack Obama just spent on his Christmas vacation, how many times they've redecorated the residence. Every time Michelle Obama buys a dress, all the price of that dress is published. It's all out for public scrutiny. And if you study, especially the Obamas, is really taken a toll on them, especially Michelle Obama. If you notice, she's way less public. She used to be out there. She used to be doing all sorts of things. The criticism has gotten to her. She can't stand it. She's trying to do things for her daughter. She wanted to take them to Europe, and so she did. They have to take Air Force One. They can't go fly on Southwest Airlines, to Madrid. And when they did that, there was this huge story that came out criticizing them for using government money to go taking European vacations. It's all out in the open. It's all available for us to go and have our own opinion about it. Sometimes that's not necessarily fair to those people. News that comes over the airways, this is electronic media. So this is the rise of radio and television, and then finally the internet. And so that's where we've really seen news media change. It's now a lot more image-based, how you look, how you sound. One of the things that we're going to do later on in this unit is talk about one of the most famous debates between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, and how the image of those two men really changed their campaigns. When you actually got to see what they look like and how they act, that has become a very big deal in whether you vote for somebody or not, which is an interesting aspect to a campaign that wasn't there before. This is an example of a president who struggled using this new media platform. Dwight Eisenhower was very uncomfortable in front of the camera, and so he would tape all of his speeches, all his news conferences. They would watch them, and then he would release them to the media. He did not do live broadcasts, simply because for him, his image, it took him a lot to sort of portray the image he wanted to portray. He's a very gruff man. He's got a huge history in the military. And so he wasn't that warm, welcoming president, and it took him a little while to get there. And so they sort of managed that news, most definitely. So we see this revolution of electronic media. Let's talk a little bit about what electronic media has done, especially in today's media world and the politics that they portray. The biggest thing here that you need to understand is that our electronic media most definitely encourages what we call selective information processing, meaning that you pick the information that you want to read about. When I turn on the news and I can pick whether I want to look at MSNBC or Fox News or even Comedy Central, which isn't really news, please be careful about that. I can go ahead and turn on things that only I want to hear. I can turn on a news organization that will constantly tell me the things that I agree with. And then there's no need for me to go and listen to somebody who I don't agree with. This selective information processing continues to drive this partisan politics problem that we have, because when you can turn on media and get your news in a very specific, biased way, it makes your views very specific and biased. And that rise has really come out of the idea of narrowcasting. Narrowcasting is the idea of selecting a specific group of the population and appealing to them in your media. So things like Fox News have found a selected group of people that will follow them and watch them, and so they continue to, publish stories or release stories that are in favor of the thoughts and beliefs of those people. So that's what we kind of consider narrowcasting. We also see the rise of talk show politics. These are things like Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Fallon would even be considered talk show politics. Lots of the nightly shows would be considered talk show politics. Here's the really big concern to me looking in political science. Last year they did a poll of young voters. I want to say it was like that 18 to 25. And a large majority of them, when they were asked where they get their news, credited Comedy Central and Stephen Colbert and like The Daily Show. That's not news. It's not news. They are finding ways to make fun of news, to parody news, but it's not news. And Jon Stewart has said that multiple times in interviews, that he's there to sort of poke fun at media and to highlight some of the really, interesting, funny moments of media, but he's not there to give you facts and opinions or facts about candidates or campaigns or even government programs. In the world of political science, there's a very big concern that like your children will grow up watching these shows that are funny and really entertaining, but walk away from them thinking that that is the news that they need to know about, and that can be pretty dangerous. We also see the rise of talk radio. We can credit like the hipster movement to this, because 10 years ago talk radio was like not going anywhere fast, and in fact a lot of them kind of thought talk radio was on the outs. But we have seen a rise in talk radio in the last few years. These are things like NPR, WPR, so public radio. Public radio is not biased. It's probably some of the best news you can get. They're very, they talk to both sides and things like that. But we also see some partisan talk radio. So Rush Limbaugh has a talk radio show, Glenn Beck, Rachel Maddow, and again, they're appealing to a very specific group of people, and they have a very large following, but they're very controversial. They talk about a lot of things that could be considered controversial, things like that. And then obviously we see the impact of social networking, blogging, and the internet. It's huge. Blogging has been huge, especially in Washington politics. What I mean by Washington politics is the day-to-day things that happen in Washington, D.C. are often blogged about by campaigns, by individuals, by candidates themselves. The thing you have to remember about blogs is that, again, you click publish and it's out there. Nobody has to review it. Nobody has to fact check you. You can really write whatever you want to write, and they do. Also in the world of social networking, blogging, and the internet, we're seeing a rise in podcasting. the idea of downloading media files that will give you information in a very specific way, and then obviously Facebook and other sites. The thing you have to understand is that social networking in its original intent was just to simply be a social, personal use sort of thing that advertisers, consumer companies, and the political world have really found a way to leverage it and to make it work for them. You have to really be aware that what you do on the internet is monitored by a lot of organizations. Things like what you Google search is all recorded by Google. They know, your server number and the things that you've Googled. So things like last week I Googled, I have a friend in San Francisco and I wanted to know when would be an appropriate time to call her. So I Googled, what time is it in San Francisco right now? And for the last week I've been getting on the side of my Facebook feed, are you going to San Francisco? Here's a great airline ticket. Here's a great vacation to San Francisco. I had to look up something about my engagement ring for my insurance policy. Now I get all these like, are you getting engaged? Here's a couple of rings that you might want to take a look at. Google has taken all that information and now they're spinning it out to companies like Facebook and Twitter and all of those other social networks, and they're using that to specifically advertise to me. They're finding a way to sort of try and get that to me. So companies have figured out how to do that. Political organizations will figure out how to do that. Candidates have figured out how to do that. They will buy up that information from Google and other, search engines to try and specifically campaign to you. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the functions of media and what their main functions are. What you need to understand is that the media's number one function is entertainment, okay? Second is reporting the news, but first is entertainment, and that is the bottom line. Media cannot survive if they don't entertain you enough for you to come back the next day. So when even you watch the nightly news, take a look at what is the first story. It's always the sensational story. It's always, Donald Trump said this really, degrading thing about somebody, or, the president fell or did something ridiculous. It's entertaining to us. Is it necessarily news? No. You're gonna actually find the news in the second half, well, not even the second half, in the middle portion of a news, a nightly news report, because the function here is to entertain you, is to bring you back, is to keep you watching, is to keep their numbers up. Obviously, the second function is to report the news. The third is to identify public problems. But the thing you really need to understand here is that they choose which public problems you're gonna care about. And I've told you this multiple times, so I'm gonna tell it to you again. Be very careful when you look at media, because what they tell you to care about is good and all, but it may not actually be the thing you need to care about, right? So things that are happening in third world countries, things that are happening in our country that aren't glamorous, aren't popular, aren't interesting to talk about, those are big problems, but they're not covered in the media. So things like, and I'll give you this example because it is the ache in my side. I watch the nightly news every night, so about 3 out of the 5 nights that I watch, there's always a story about an unarmed person getting shot by a law enforcement official. It happens. It's still happening. I watch ABC Nightly News about 3 out of the 5 nights. There's something, okay? Is that a problem that just started happening? No. It's been happening for years. Years and years and years and years and years. The media has decided they're going to make it a problem. They're going to make it a public problem. So when you turn on the news now, it makes you feel like, whoa, what's going on in our country that nowadays, every single day, there's one of these things? Okay, well, first of all, it's not new. It's been happening for forever. And the other thing you have to understand is that they have decided to target law enforcement. And I'm going to just say this now because obviously I'm a biased audience. I grew up with a police officer in my home. He was a police officer for more than 30 years. How many times did he take his gun out of his holster? Once. And why? Because an animal was racing towards him. Okay? you're getting this biased idea that law enforcement are these quick guys who pull out their guns right away when they feel nervous and they shoot unarmed people all the time. That's not happening, okay? The media is trying to get you to feel like that's happening because they run a story every single day about it. And most of the time they run that story from a really small town or a big city or an issue that has been happening that you don't get the full story, you just get that small little clip. So be very, 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 very careful because the media has so much leverage in that to make you believe that something is important. When yes, I'm not saying that that's not important, and I'm not saying that it's not a problem. It's a huge problem, but it's not necessarily new, and it's not necessarily as, big as they make it out to be. You can pull stories every single day about the same story. It's a big country that we live in, but it may not actually be what it is. So just be careful. Socializing new generations is the next role of media. One of their big functions is to sort of be there for your generation to connect to people, to find people around the world, around the country, who may share the same ideas as you do, to have experiences together. You live in a generation that is much more apt to talk to someone around the world than I would be, or even my parents would be for sure. It provides a political forum. We do start to see that media has become a place for people to discuss and debate, to talk about politics, sometimes in good ways, sometimes in bad ways. And then finally, the function of media is to make a profit. That's the thing you really need to understand. Media needs to survive, right? They need to make a profit. They need to pay their CEOs and their anchors and all of their staff. And so they're going to try and make a profit. They're going to do things that will make you come back and keep watching. They're going to run stories that are interesting to you and maybe not necessarily the most important news that you need to hear, or things like that. Okay. Advertising, so we're talking a little here about television and political campaigns. How do political campaigns use media? It's really through television, and that's really through advertising. Get used to it. By October of this year, when you turn on the television, every single commercial will be some sort of political campaign ad. It will get old, but it is one of the main ways that political campaigns get their message out there. They can't rely on news media because it's so inconsistent. Should a big story break that day, your candidate may not get that top story that you were hoping for. So advertising is a surefire way to get that image out there. Management of news coverage. So political campaigns have to keep managing their news coverage, making sure that their news coverage is constantly positive, that it helps their candidate rather than hurts their candidate. And what we call this is spin doctoring. It's sort of moving a story from possibly a negative outcome to a positive outcome. And I'm going to give you an example of this because I was watching the news last week and it was awesome. It was like one of the best spins I've ever seen. Donald Trump did a rally, I think in New Hampshire, and he sold 20,000 tickets to a rally that only holds 6,000 people. Okay, I'm going to say that again. He sold 20,000 tickets to a rally at a place in New Hampshire that only holds 6,000 people. Okay, so he sold 2 times as many tickets. Those people aren't going to be able to get in. Okay, so the news coverage starts to come out and film all these people who are lined up for blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks in this town, waiting to get in. Well, half of them aren't going to get in because the building doesn't hold that many people. So what they did is genius. The Trump campaign is genius. I'm not kidding you. They go and they buy a bunch of pizzas. And they take these pizzas and they give them to their staffers. And the staffers walked out and gave everyone standing in the line a free piece of pizza. That was the news story. It wasn't the story about how Donald Trump sold 20,000 tickets to a rally he can't give 20,000 people. It's the story that, look at the Trump campaign. They're giving out free pieces of pizza when you wait for that rally. It was awesome. It was the best spin I've ever seen. Because normally that story would be really negative for the Trump campaign. How dare he go ahead and tell these 20,000 people they get to come and see him? No, the story gets to be, look at how nice the Trump campaign is, that even when you're sitting out in the cold and you're not going to go get to see him, you get a free piece of pizza. It's really cool. They did it fantastically. So that's a good kind of example of spin and how that happens. Campaign debates are huge. It's a huge moment for campaigns to be on television. It's free television media. A candidate doesn't really pay to be in a debate, and they don't, so then they get to be on air and they get to be visible for an hour, and so it's a really nice place for them to get some momentum building. And then after a campaign debate, there's a huge amount of spin. All of the staff will come out and they'll answer questions from the media and they'll try and spin it. So things like if your candidate didn't do it really well, you'll go out and you'll try and spin it in a way of saying, the questions were unfair, or the candidate's really focusing on this and, didn't prepare as much to this debate, things like that. They'll try and make the story a little bit more positive. This is a television ad, a campaign ad. It's called the Daisy Girl ad. It's one of the most famous ads, political ads. It's about this little girl is picking these petals, and she's counting down, and then this atomic bomb explodes, and it was like shocking and all sorts of things. You're going to actually get to see it later on this week, or next week. I think there's an assignment where you're going to take a look at some of these ads. This is a presidential debate between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama in 2004. Internet campaigns. So how have political campaigns started to use the internet? Your book is going to give you a couple of examples here. What you really need to know is that internet campaigns really started in 2004. And Barack Obama really started to use it widely in 2008, 2009. And then he goes ahead and builds upon that in 2012. He used social media to campaign for money in a way that we've never seen that happen before. And now you see candidates use it all the time, but President Obama had kind of done this social media campaign of please pledge this amount of money. He's meeting a lot of people who don't normally get that, pledge call, and so he campaigned for a ton of money. And the thing you really need to know here is that for internet campaigns, they get to micro-target. It's one of the easiest ways for them to micro-target. They run a television ad, they don't know who it's going to get to. They run a radio ad, they don't know who it's going to get to. But they can micro-target you in an internet campaign. They can go ahead and say, if people have searched this, this, and this, they get this campaign poster. If they've been searching this, this, and this, we're going to run this little video ad at the beginning of their YouTube video or whatever. It's totally micro-targeted, and it's fantastic. In the world of political campaigns, it's super easy to do, and it doesn't cost much. So. The media's impact on voters. So what does it impact for you? The main reason, or the main way that media impacts you is that it continues to drive this idea of selective attention. That you can watch and ignore the things that, watch what you like and ignore the things that you don't. It drives you to confirm your opinions as opposed to sway your opinions, which is a big deal. We're starting to see that voters are becoming more entrenched in their beliefs, and part of it we feel like is because the media continues to support that. If I am going to vote for Marco Rubio and I follow him on Twitter and nobody else, I get to hear all the great things that Marco Rubio does, and I don't have to hear about any of the bad things that he does because I'm not watching any of his opponents. It entrenches who I vote for as opposed to, makes me be more deciding. And so the impact on undecided voters, we know that it does have an impact on undecided voters. It's just really hard to tell what kind of impact it has. Media can be used to really help undecided voters by helping them decide who to vote for and get themselves educated, but we're not entirely sure that it's ever used, widely for that. Okay, and then this is your last note for today. We're going to talk a little bit about how government tries to control the media. It's really important. They often will publish some prepackaged news. This is things like they'll do things, like the White House will really focus on an issue for a week. we're really talking about education this week, or we're really talking about the economy this week and trying to pull some news out of there. But really, when we talk about media and government control, the hub of this is media and the executive branch, media and the president. How does the president handle the media? How does the media handle the president? The thing you need to know really about this is that they both need each other to survive. It's funny because they're both trying to get at each other, right? The president's always trying to get the press to, do what he needs them to do, and the media is always trying to find the things that the president, doesn't want to tell them. But the reality is that they need each other. They won't be able to survive without each other. There is a White House press corps. So the press is with the president on a daily basis, almost 24 hours a day. There's a press room set up in the White House. It's home to the White House press corps, and those men and women are there every single day, being briefed by the press secretary. This is a position in the White House office, whose main job is to work with the press, but they also sometimes get interviews with the president or other White House officials. They're there for photo opportunities, other things like that. So they're there very often. The picture of FDR on the right is because FDR is kind of known as the president who handled the media the best. He really was able to get the media on his side. Part of it is that he is such a warm human being that he would call them into his Oval Office, he would have a drink with them, he would call them by their first name, he would treat them more as a friend, whereas presidents before them kind of tried to help hold the press at an arm's length. And that really puts off the media. They feel like then they're fighting to try and get some news stories. FDR was sort of really welcoming. Yeah, absolutely, you can write about that, talk about that. And so the press was really on his side and wrote a lot of really positive things for him. Setting the public agenda, this is two terms that we need to talk about, is priming and framing. Priming is how the government is trying to give the story to the media. It's always going to try and be positive, right? The president's doing a lot for this. He's really working on this. He's really aware of the problem. Framing is how the media presents it to you. So it's sort of that idea of how do they pass the media out. And sometimes it's the way that it's been primed, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes the media takes a look at that priming and says, okay, you're really just only going with the positive spin. We're going to get into this and really talk about what the reality of it looks like. And then lastly is investigative reporting. The best example of this is Watergate. Investigative reporting really came to be after the Watergate scandal. The reporters were simply investigating the burglary. Kind of felt like there was something going on, but they had absolutely no idea what they were getting themselves into. And essentially that investigative report, was the turning point to Nixon's resignation. It started that kind of ball rolling. So investigative reporting is really important. We use it a lot, but it's also, you have to be careful. Sometimes there is something to investigate and sometimes there isn't.